It's my pleasure to introduce the next speaker, Professor Dr. Elisabeth de Vries. She is from the ESMO Society, known for the development of the clinical benefit scale. She's a professor in oncology at the University Medical Center in Groningen. ESMO, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So I will try to go with you from ESMO-MCBS as scale, how they can be incorporated in guidelines, and how we can balance that for the patient. This is my declaration of interest. I use a number of slides that you may all know very well that are used with the European Commission logo on slides for the EU HTA. So this is the life cycle of a cancer medicine, and basically where it's all about right now is this period where the GCA is done. The timelines in the initial regulations seem to be a little bit different from the draft that we also just recently saw on the Implementing Act. It already seems to be a little bit longer. But it's good to realize, if you think about balancing for patients, that doctors and patients do much more with the medicines later on. And I will get back to that. I'm really happy that I learned that the committee is willing, when they indicate regarding a certain medicine that there are uncertainties, to reconsider when new data are there, the HTA aspect. So this is this governance structure, member state coordination group, and then these different subgroups, and important for today, the joint clinical assessment group, and of course the input of the stakeholders. And I will try to show how we might team in there. So these five joint HTA activities, the joint clinical assessment, the joint scientific consultations, and then the other three aspects that you're definitely aware of. Now, what is important for oncologists is that cancer medicines start early next year. But what is also important, as many cancers are rare diseases, or there are rare indications within huge tumor types, that the orphan medicinal products will be part of this approach also as of 2028. So where could we contribute? If we think about the joint clinical assessment steps, then it's all started, as you already learned, but I think important steps is how are the PICOs going to be done? How is the health technology developer making his dossier? And how are the assessors going to work? And what is going to be the input from the stakeholders, and how can they prepare themselves? Now, ESMO has a number of tools, and I think for today I would like to address especially shortly ESMO-MCBS and the guidelines and how they balance with patients. First, the ESMO-MCBS, that was really started because we saw that there were enormous disparities in access to cancer medicines in Europe. And we also realized that it's not very sustainable, the prices we have to pay now in the near future. So that was the reason to develop a validated scale. It scores drugs that are newly approved in the curative and the non-curative setting. It also has a form for single-arm studies in the non-curative setting, and in the next version it will also have a form for single-arm studies in the curative setting. It grades the medicine, and the best and a significant magnitude of clinical benefit is in the curative setting an A or a B score, and in the non-curative setting a 5 or a 4 score. Now, this is an example of a form in the non-curative setting when the primary endpoint of the study is overall survival. And you see that we have 3 different subforms because really what a new drug has to prove also depends on how well the comparator performs. Now, what's new? We hope to release within the next months version 2 of the ESMO-MCBS to adjust to new things that happen in drug approval. Last year, we launched the ESMO-MCBS for hematology together with the European Hematology Association. And in addition, we published last year criteria for quality of life studies. And that project was done together with the EORTC. And the intention is that within 3 years after release of this paper, all studies will be scored for quality of life along these criteria. We hope to give also pharma time to adjust to these better defining criteria, and that way make the inclusion of quality of life in the ESMO-MCBS even more meaningful. Now, there are scorecards, and there are now almost 400 scorecards online. You can search them yourself. But what I think is important for the process we are talking about today is that we hope to launch really very soon an interactive online scoring tool that you can use yourself even though the full paper is not yet out there. You can put all the data from the study you submit to for the GCA in this system, and you can see how you score and why you score how with the study and with the drug. We think it's very easy to deal with, and I hope we can share with you it very soon. Now, in addition, ESMO has clinical practice guidelines. They are prepared and reviewed by experts in the field, and it's all about evidence-based medicine. Because things can change so fast at the moment in oncology, there are also living guidelines if certain updates have to be made. Everything is online, you can find everything, just in the hope to have updated information for the best treatment of patients. But this enormous kinetics in oncology will also be a challenge for the HTA assessment. These clinical practice guidelines and also the way they are created, everything is on the web. But what I think is also good to realize if you think about balancing with the patients is that real-world cases are also discussed where the experts and the guidelines and people online can discuss how really to deal for your individual patient with these guidelines. And Bernd Werman already addressed this issue that guidelines change rapidly. ESMO-MCBS scores are always part of the guidelines, but it also illustrates that therapies can become obsolete very fast. And here is an example where the new drug in 2019 with a good ESMO-MCBS score became the comparator in a study with a good new drug part of the guidelines in 2021. Then there is a patient guide service. So all the different diseases also have patient information and also in different languages. Now, if we think about joint clinical assessment, you can imagine that for the health technology developer, the assessors, and the stakeholder network, this kind of information as a kind of library for that information might be very helpful. Now, but you have to realize that in daily life, there are numerous reasons for extra balancing steps. Patients often have comorbidity. patients often have had a transplant. We have many patients that have a second cancer. Their age may play a role, their mental status, their own opinion. And it's just good to realize that in daily practice, patients and doctors have to deal often with numerous guidelines given everything that is happening in that patient. And that really means that doctors have to think very well what would be in the best interest of the patients, and patients have to think very well. So, issues in the stakeholder network. Now back to this life cycle of a cancer medicine. It's interesting to realize that when a drug is available, doctors and patients dream up new studies, like what dose? Is this really the optimal dose? What duration? Is it really the optimal duration? Or new indications are considered and proved to be meaningful. And in this respect, it's really interesting to realize that if the new pharma regulation is going to be approved, and that might happen in the very near future, that there is an option in there that also non-profit organizations can submit a dossier to EMA if we are talking about repurposing. And that could be another indication, but it could also be a different dose, for example, for medicines. That would mean that they would also have to provide information to the EU HTA. But I think this is a very interesting development and could be of major benefit in Europe as well. I would like to thank you for your attention, and more than happy to answer questions later on.
Thanks very much, Elisabeth, for this great and interesting presentation. I think ESMO-MCBS 2.0 we will discuss in the panel session in a second.